Good evening, and welcome to the Brewster Ladies Library. It's wonderful to be in a group where everybody is so happy to see everybody else that they're just welcoming everyone. So it makes for a nice atmosphere, so we're happy about that. So welcome to the Brewster Ladies Library. My name is Kathy Carcroft, and it is my great honor to be the director here. And tonight we have a wonderful program. As I was saying to some members of the audience, it's a varied program. We are celebrating some wonderful work of Brewster authors, and we are listening to some beautiful poetry. And we are first going to talk about Wising Up Press. It's a collaborative press, and for those of you in the audience who have your manuscript in your back pocket, please listen up. So please welcome Maria Navas.
Hello. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. First, what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about the press, our different points that we especially look for in our authors and our contributors to our anthologies. And then secondly, what I wanted to do was kind of talk a little bit about my own experience as a Wising Up Press author. And lastly, I'd like to highlight the evening. It's going to be fantastic. Aside from my talking about the press, then also I've got two very special readers in addition to myself who are going to be reading, Sharon Leader and Milton Teichman, so that's going to be wonderful. So first, let me talk a little bit about Wising Up Press and what it is that we do. So I'm just going to kind of paraphrase from what it is I call our talking points, just meaning the main bullet points of Wising Up. So the first one is this. As a press, we have a clear social mission. That is the fostering of an appreciation of difference and the challenges and rewards of pluralism, and most importantly, an interest in the role that art, particularly the story, in making it easier, can play in making it easier for us to do this. So we call our approach finding the we and them, the us and you, essentially. And it's about, if you'll notice throughout the Wising Up books, throughout the Wising Up anthologies, really, if I could talk about our ethos, the thing that we look for most in writing is that which in which the writer seeks to self-reflect and identify. Second talking point. We are a press with professional skills in writing, editing, and publishing. As publishers, we have this experience, as well as a great deal of experience in various subject areas. The members of the collective also contribute their own substantial publishing skills and professional experience. So in other words, we create books that people like to have on their shelves. Third is we exercise a strong curatorial function. We are interested in the quality of the writing we publish, whether the writer is previously unpublished or highly published. We want authentic voices and well-crafted work that makes us think, opens our hearts, and is about something. We publish less than a third of the submissions we receive for anthologies and a smaller percentage of the manuscripts that we receive for the collective. And there is a difference between the publishing collective and the anthologies and what it means to contribute to them, and I'll talk about that also in a little bit. Next talking point, we are respectful of writers. We read all the manuscripts we receive and respond promptly in such a way that writers have something to grow on, because we also see that as one of the important responsibilities of the press and something that matters to us personally as writers ourselves. And I'll tell you guys this right now. Wising Up Press, as far as the founders go, they give some of the nicest acceptance and rejection letters ever. I'm serious, and not just nice, but like super constructive, incredibly detailed, giving every single writer the time that they deserve. And to me anyway, I feel that that is so refreshing, because I don't know about you all, but I have submitted to journals, and I still do, and rejections are inevitable, but there's nothing more sort of nebulous or excruciating than the standard form rejection letter. You know what I mean? Or even worse, the standard form rejection letter with the handwritten note. You know, like, oh, but we loved your work. It came so close, didn't make the cut. You know, and what I really love about us at Wising Up Press is that if for any reason there's something that we'd want you to restructure or reconsider in the manuscript, then you can definitely expect for us to highlight those points. Last and not least, we are interested in what happens collectively after a work is published and encourage collaboration among the authors of both our anthologies and the collective. We have sponsored some joint readings by writers included in our anthologies, as well as those published through the collective. However, we are also delighted that contributors in different cities, New York, here on the Cape, and in Minneapolis, have taken the initiative to organize readings themselves. One of the qualities of these readings that we've heard commented on again and again as worthy of note is that the writers who come to read also come ready to listen. This delights us because it reflects our desire that our books foster new or strengthen relationships based on this really important stuff, the mysteries of life daily presents to us. So those are sort of the nuts and bolts of the talking points, but I sort of wanted to also talk about my own experience in the collective and also highlight the difference between the editorial collective and Wising Up Press. So Wising Up Press, we are an independent publisher. We do publish genres spanning fiction, nonfiction, poetry, short stories, memoirs, so on and so forth. You can check out any of the books right here. I have copies of Connected, one of our anthologies, for sale, and also my own book, A Hymn That Meanders. But it's only when you sign the contract with us as an author, if you've been accepted for publication, that you would serve on the editorial collective as part of the publishing contract, okay? It's different if you're an anthology contributor, then that means you're sort of free to come and go as you please, and you've published in the anthology. You know what I mean? The same thing as if you've been published in a literary journal. So that's one major sort of separation I wanted to make. So as far as the press overview goes, I mean, I'd just like to reiterate, we're an independent publisher with a social mission. You'll see a lot of our anthologies talk about, we have different categories. We like particularly subjects such as illness and grace. What does the body mean? What does it mean to be sick? What does it mean to cope with death? Okay, especially if you're in the medical field, we love hearing about memoirs from doctors and nurses, as well as people who, they themselves have been infirmed. Also resiliency, and also families. So if I could sort of break down the different categories, it would be those. So if you look at our anthologies, if you look at all of our different books, in some way they touch upon those different categories, or they can touch upon all of them at once. So the way the collective is organized, and this is something that I think is really neat and really salient, what we do is, when we gather everyone together to serve on this editorial board, our requirement is essentially empathetic, self-aware, socially aware people whose books are quote-unquote a Wising Up Press book. As in a person who also, if you do sign on with the collective, has something that they can bring to the table in terms of publishing. Okay, that can be editorial skills for copy editing. That can be the willingness to read when we have open submissions for anthologies, because we get a lot of submissions. So that's another task. Organizing readings is another example, or in my particular case, I serve as acquisitions editor. So in other words, if I see somebody and if I read their work and I think that it's something that aesthetically speaking would be great for us, then I would strongly recommend that person for the collective and for as a possibility of being one of our authors. So if you do get accepted, you serve on the collective for a 3-year term. So essentially what that means is you'll be bringing these skills to the collective. I will say it's incredibly autonomous, but it's also a very, I want to say, it's a bonding endeavor, because we do check in with each other. We do have frequent conference calls. And when I served and was most active on the collective, we'd meet maybe 1 to 3 times a year, depending on how much we could make it. So the way that Wising Up finds authors for publication, well, like I said, if you look at Poets and Writers at any time, it's pretty hard not to see, at all times we're posting a call for submissions, right? That might be slightly hyperbolic, but not too much so. If you look at our anthologies, I mean, we haven't been around for that long, but within the 6 or 7 years that Wising Up has been around, we have so many anthologies. I mean, a pretty remarkable output of books, and this isn't all of them. We're still at it. We're still going. So the way that we find authors is if you're somebody who's contributed to our anthology, that's a great way. That's how they found me. I contributed to the anthology Double Lives, Reinvention, and Those We Leave Behind, and then eventually later on sent my finished manuscript out to Wising Up Press. We don't believe in contests or anything like that because what we're trying to do as a press is kind of get away from that whole publishing model, you know, of this idea of having to win a contest and having to go through a traditional academic press, when instead we'd sort of like to, if you will, be a little bit more, I guess a little bit more kind of careful and steady and organic, and allow our writers to come to us and us to them as we see that they're fit. And this isn't just as an author, right? Not just in terms of the writing's ethos. Certainly we look for good writing, but beyond that, what we're really looking for also is somebody who can serve on the collective, who can be a wonderful collective member, who has a strength in marketing, editing, you know, organizing readings, any of those things. So we'll definitely be talking more about that after this presentation. We'll have a short Q&A where Sharon, Milton, and I will each kind of touch upon more of any questions that you have regarding the collective. So in the meantime, I would like to highlight the events for the evening. This evening, both Sharon and Milton will read from the Wising Up Anthology Connected that they were both published in. Then I will read from my book that was published through Wising Up Press in 2011. It's titled A Hymn That Meanders, and then we'll hold the Q&A. But first, I would love to have the library's own Kathy Cockcroft. And Kathy actually was kind enough to review one of our anthologies, and she's just going to talk for a second really informally before we get on with the reading. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Hello, everybody, again, and thank you, Maria. I was the lucky one when I received an email from Sharon and Milton and discussing that this wonderful new book, that was not their words, mine, and would I like to read it and review it. The title is Connected, What Remains as We All Change. And as I was listening to Maria, I thought she nailed all the points. I mean, the mystery of what life is all about. When I read this book, I was struck by the strength of the subject, which is relationships. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to read a little bit of the review that I wrote. That this Connected anthology is a collection of haunting and surprising stories. It's memoirs and poems, and it provided me and other readers with an intimate look into the basic ingredients of our lives, relationships and the passing of times. Connections in life are so important, but they're also messy. They're filled with landmines, but we can't live without them. Families, lovers, friends all provide opportunities to recognize what we all know but seldom acknowledge. We can't control outcomes. I hate when that happens, as it does in our lives all the time. My children, my husband, my co-workers, but it's true. I found that the book will move the reader to mark a page, share a revelation, feel the anguish, and celebrate a ride. I can't tell you how many times, I marked the page and I called somebody up and I said, listen to this, listen to this. It is such a rich collection of stories, and you can just feel the life experiences. One contributor, Hannah Thomason, wrote, "We must stand hand in hand, watch the creek come, and with a turn of the head, watch it go. Open your eyes, we'll unpack the book, crack the eggs, and paint all the doors blue." And I thought that was really a lovely synopsis of the stream of stories that I read in this book. It's just a wonderful anthology, and I hope that you'll all have an opportunity to read from it. So I would recommend it to all of you. And it is my great honor now to introduce Sharon. You're going to read first? All right, Sharon Leder is going to read her story from Connected, What Remains as We All Change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria and Kathy, and thank you for being here for this program. First, I want to say that I'm very indebted to Connected and the editors, Heather Tosteson and Charles D. Brockett, because they put out a call that seemed very intriguing, and I was at the point where, after working on a novel for many decades, I wanted to take the opportunity and the risk of sending out individual chapters as stories. And I really needed a boost because I had been working many years and got many of those rejection letters that Maria described, and they were very discouraging. And Milton, my husband, told me about this call for papers, call for stories and poems, and I thought I might have a chance because we had two different last names. And I thought that maybe that would make it a little easier for my story to be considered on its own. And I was so thrilled when I learned that it had been accepted. The first story ever that I had accepted was accepted online, and I know online publication is wonderful, but I really wanted to see a story in print. And I had this opportunity with Connected, so I'm very indebted to Heather and Charles. I might also say that the editing help that I got with the story was respectful and appropriate and made the story so much better. So thank you, Heather and Charles. I'm just going to read selections from this story. It's called The Two Fathers, 1995. No, it's not true. Shooting up heroin? Joseph and Spencer? Impossible. The screams, Sarah's mother's, came from the kitchen. What's heroin? Sarah wondered, a word she had never heard before. Is Spencer someone bad? Sarah, 8 years old, had just arrived home from public school 16, her younger brother in hand. She settled her brother down on the rug in the living room, where drawn blinds kept the room dark in the afternoons. She turned the TV set on loud to The Merry Mailman and rushed into the kitchen. The aroma of stuffed cabbage filled the room. She saw her mother trembling, holding the phone, and she shut the swinging kitchen door behind her. Why should I believe you? Her mother shouted angrily into the receiver. The ladle her mother was holding in her hand dropped to the floor. She didn't bother to pick it up. My husband's not an addict, do you hear? Slamming the receiver down, she collapsed into a chair. No, he wouldn't do this to me. Her mother looked more bewildered than ever before, even more upset than when Sarah's father began working on Saturdays. Mommy, please, Sarah begged, grabbing her mother's arm. What's wrong? What trouble is Daddy in? No trouble, sweetheart, her mother answered feebly, stroking her daughter's hair. It's just this call gave me a bad headache. That's all. She stood up, walked to the stove, and turned off the flame under the cabbage. The phone rang again. With her head in her hands, her mother said, Let it ring, Sarah. We won't answer it now. But it could be Daddy, Sarah cried, and automatically picked up the phone. I must tell you, Helen, the frantic voice on the other end insisted, if the police find Joseph with marks on his arms, he's finished. They'll arrest him. But if Joseph stops, Spencer will stop too. Spencer's always looked up to your Joseph. Who's this? Sarah asked, frightened. Mommy, there's a lady on the phone talking about the police catching Daddy with marks on his arms. When her father arrived home, Sarah was already in bed. The bedroom she shared with her brother Robbie was just a few feet down the hall from the kitchen, where her mother began speaking louder than usual. "So you're home early tonight." "I'm tired, Helen." Sarah heard her father groan. She strained to hear the rest of his words. "Bad news," he seemed to mumble. "Manhattan, deliveries. So you have to go out again." Her mother's voice had an unfamiliar tinny ring. "Yeah," he said. There was a pause. "Thought I'd grab a bite." "What's wrong? Helen, have you been crying?" For a moment, her mother didn't answer, and then she heard her say in an angry voice, "You promised me you'd stay clean." Sarah didn't know what her mother meant. Was her father dirty? "What are you talking about?" he said. "You know what I mean. Mitzi told me the truth." The bitch. It sounded like her father started banging on the table. Then the whoosh and rustle of maple leaves against her bedroom window began to shut out her parents' voices. She just had to hear more clearly what was going on. She rose from her bed, stepped barefooted past Robbie, still asleep, and closed the door behind her. She slunk down the foyer hallway towards the kitchen and found the swinging door closed. No wonder she had such a hard time hearing their talk. She pushed the door carefully so that it opened just a bit. She saw her father, his back to her, hovering over her mother near the refrigerator, his arm raised. Then opening the door a little more, standing in the doorway and rubbing her eyes, she cried, "What's wrong, Mommy?" Her father swiveled around in Sarah's direction, then quickly turned his back on her. Her mother rushed to embrace Sarah and calm her whimpering. She coaxed her back to the bedroom. "Shh, honey, everything's okay. Mommy's okay. Daddy and I are just talking." "So loud?" Sarah noticed. Her mother's eyes were swollen. "We'll keep our voices down," her mother whispered. "Go back to bed now." Sarah didn't believe that her parents were only talking. She sneaked out of her bedroom again and quietly made her way to the closed kitchen door, where she waited to hear them. If she moved quickly enough, she could open the door a crack, then pop away without being noticed. "You're a junkie," her mother hollered and broke down crying. "Helen," Sarah heard her father plead, "I'm lost without it." He was clasping and unclasping his hands on the kitchen table, large butcher hands with butcher fingers, chunky, calloused, bruised. "You're lost with it," she yelled back scornfully. "Don't you understand? What will happen to us if you get arrested or if you get deathly sick?" "I don't have time to argue with you, Helen. I need money." He was hopping as if he were jumping rope. "Are you out of your mind? I have rent to pay. Do you want the landlord to put us out on the street?" Her face turned sheet white. Her father darted towards her mother like King Kong turned ferocious. "No, no, Daddy, stop!" Her mother seemed as defenseless as the actress Fay Wray when King Kong drew her into his clutches on top of the Empire State Building. The next moment, Sarah saw her father shove her mother against the wall and twist her arm. "Daddy, leave her alone. You're hurting Mommy." The small kitchen filled with Sarah's shouts and her mother's screams. Sarah thought it was a miracle Robbie was still asleep. Maybe he was awake and as frightened as she was. Sarah hated her father. She wanted to rush out and topple the gorilla, sweep her mother into her arms and carry her away to safety, but her legs felt like tree trunks. Sarah watched her mother fall to her knees like a beggar. Then King Kong landed a blow on her mother's shoulder, forcing her stomach down to the floor, causing the bills in her hand to scatter over the linoleum. Sarah burst into tears. Stop it, Daddy." Her father shriveled before her eyes into a crazy person, crawling on the floor, collecting dollar bills. He locked lunatic eyes on Sarah and lumbered out of the apartment. As she lay in bed, Sarah's thoughts twisted like the tangled maple branches outside her bedroom window. Is my daddy a wild animal? Fear mingled with hate welled up inside her. Her mother was in trouble and she must save her. But how? Her teeth clenched, her mind plotted. She pictured the sharp and gleaming roast beef knife her father kept in the kitchen drawer. Just wait until Daddy comes home. She lay awake imagining the grainy feel of the knife's wooden handle in her palm. But then she thought, did she really want her father dead? The father she knew and loved might turn around and say, Sarah, in the jolly voice she recognized, and she'd feel ashamed. Grief and terror washed over her, and she fell asleep exhausted. That night, she dreamt that her father met her and Robbie at school. Smiling broadly, he took them for a stroll along the promenade that overlooked the East River and the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. The sun was shining, the river sparkled. A strange masked man appeared just where a set of stone steps led down a steep decline to the expressway. The stranger pulled off his mask. His face was the spitting image of her father's. She grabbed hold of Robbie. I'm your real father, the impostor said, shooting his hands up like a police officer stopping traffic. You kids have to come with me. Get lost, you fake, the original Joseph stammered and stuttered. The bully impostor struck her father's shoulder, and the two of them came to blows. Filled with dread, Sarah wanted to root for her stuttering father, but she was confused. Who was who? She couldn't tell them apart. As one father pushed the other out of sight, way down the steps, Sarah wondered, her heart beating fast. Which father had fallen to his death, and which one was with her now? Thank you. The next reader is Milton Teichman.
Thank you, Sharon. The name of the story is Influence. It's about two middle-aged individuals who come together in a very joyous relationship. David and Deborah. David is a college professor. Deborah is a kindergarten teacher and by avocation a talented pianist. And only one thing mars Deborah's happiness, and that is the terrible burden that she feels in relation to her job as a kindergarten teacher with very large classes getting larger each year, the absence of supplies, the absence of aides and so forth. And after 35 years of teaching, she longs for another experience, another work experience, and she thinks of possibly retiring. David, who deeply wants her to be happy and contented and joyous, he encourages her. Being optimistic by nature, he says, that's a great idea, Deborah. Why don't you, have you thought of, what would you like to do? And she says, I would like to perhaps get a master's degree. The new school in Manhattan is offering a degree in the humanities. It includes poetry and art and music and philosophy, and maybe I could get a job at some institution, some museum afterward, or some musical organization, since I have a background in music and so forth. David encourages her. And she retires. And as a result of some failure of courage, she fails to enroll in the new school program. She becomes disoriented by the absence of her schedule, her regular schedule, and she plummets into a depression. And David is himself disoriented by her situation. I'll read selections. I won't give the ending away. It was a huge mistake, she moaned. A huge mistake. How could I have made such a huge mistake? David heard the agony of regret in her words. He felt a pain akin to her own. I should have known myself better. You'll see, Deborah, everything will be fine. You'll see. He knew how inadequate his words were. He kissed her forehead again and again. He stroked her hair. Her sobbing subsided. She drew away from him, brushed her hair back with her fingers, and looking away from him said, "Had I not known you, I would never have retired from my job." David was stunned. What do you mean? Deborah, I don't understand. Knowing you made me dissatisfied, made me want to make my life better. So what's wrong with that? Then I've had a good influence on you. I supported you in the things you wanted for yourself because I love you. And when she didn't answer, he said, I never suggested that you retire into nothing. His tone was sharper than he intended. Your plan was to study full time, remember? Why did you move away from that? She remained silent. You wanted a new work experience, a fuller life, remember? Should I have discouraged you? You can't blame me for... You made me reach beyond what was natural for me. I made you. Cut it out now. Take hold of yourself. He wished that this conversation were over, that he was already in his car driving home. He had left a sweater in the upstairs bedroom. When he came down the stairs, she moved quickly toward him. David, I don't know what came over me. Her voice was breaking. Please forgive me. I can't believe I said those things. How could I have said these things? And she covered her face with both hands. Trying to hold back his resentment, he said, Deborah, just calm yourself. You are my friend, David. No, much more. She struggled to get the words out. How could I have said what I did? To you, of all people, forgive me. Forgive me, David. I beg you to forgive me. There's nothing to forgive. Pity welled up in him. You'll see, once you get some work, things will look better. And there's always the possibility of enrolling at the new school in September. There was a moment of silence between them. He moved toward her, put his arm around her and arms around her and held her close. I love you, Deborah. Don't forget that. David's feelings were a tangle of opposites, resentment and love, disappointment and pity. My intentions were completely good, he said to himself, again and again. Yet he could not rid himself of a sense of responsibility. Maybe she would not have retired had she not met me. You're so stiff and formal with me these days, she said to him on one of his visits to her. How can I share a bed with you if you're so distant? Some days later, feeling a renewed rush of tender feeling toward Deborah, he called her on the phone and urged her to spend a long weekend with him in Rhinecliff. He could not see her spending the weekend alone in the city, brooding. We'll enjoy early spring in the country together, he told her. I can't be a burden to you, she said. I'm not bringing good spirits. Listen, whatever spirits you bring, Deborah, I value them. Don't you understand? My feeling for you doesn't depend on benefits received. If we go through this hard time together, we'll be out of the woods faster." She continued to resist. He used every resource to persuade her to come. He was about to tell her that they could look for a piano for the Rhinecliff house, so she could play when she visited, but he held back. That would sound like bribery. He would not let her say no to the invitation. Finally, she softened. Since she didn't have to work in the nursery school until Wednesday, she had taken finally a job in a nursery school. Since she didn't have to work in the nursery school until Wednesday, he suggested that she come on Saturday and stay through Tuesday. "I'll be teaching a few hours on Monday and Tuesday," he said, "but otherwise we'll be together." She arrived on Saturday afternoon. The weather could not have been more perfect. A clear May day, sunlight bathing all in a radiant light, and the fragrance of growing things everywhere. Deborah stepped off the train smiling. She wore a beautiful lavender suit that reminded David how well she looked in her clothes. And when they embraced and exchanged affectionate words of greeting, it seemed to David that maybe the good time was not far off. During the weekend, they walked a great deal, strung up a hammock between two maples near the patio, and took turns lying and reading in it. They listened to chamber music, saw an exhibit of Mexican art at the college where David taught, and visited friends of David in the nearby village of Woodstock. Monday was as radiant as the weekend that preceded. How nice that Deborah could stay through Tuesday. From near the Tuesday evening, in fact, from near the kitchen window where they had breakfast, they could see a mass of periwinkle in bloom. The unfolding leaves of the maples were translucent in the sunlight. They could see the white hammock moving slightly in the breeze. "It's all so beautiful," Deborah said, looking out the window. She began to sing a tune from a song cycle by Schumann they both enjoyed. David was glad to see the brightening of her mood. Spring does follow winter, he reassured himself. As he was getting ready to leave for class, she said, "Don't worry about me. I have a phone call or two to make. I plan to do some reading on the patio. I brought my favorite Chekhov with me, and I may take a walk along the river." David's hopefulness about the future made his teaching that day all the more satisfying. A tedious committee meeting in the afternoon seemed lighter than usual. Her life-loving nature will get her through, he thought, as he drove home from work. He imagined a return of the joy they experienced together, the possibility of a life together. When David walked into the house, he could see that a change had come over her. He hugged her, but she held herself back. Her tone was formal. "Did you have a good day?" she asked him. "Yes, we discussed one of your favorite authors." "You did," she answered, her face down, her eyes avoiding his. "Whitman," he said, hoping he could soften her. "How nice." "And your day," he asked, "did you have a good day?" "Yes," she answered, her voice rising as if in a question. "Deborah, you seem upset." "No, just thinking. Is there something you want to say?" "Oh, you're always so kind, so considerate, always ready to listen." "You're upset, Deborah." "Maybe I am. So speak up." "How curious. You want me to speak up, but how willing are you to speak the truth to me?" "What truth are you talking about?" "That you're tired of my depressed state of mind, that you'd like to be free of me so that you can pursue other relationships. No point hiding it any longer." Words failed him. He could just stare at her. "And I make you feel guilty, don't I?" "Stop now. Do you hear? Just stop." He felt his heart pounding. "I have nothing to feel guilty about."
So before I begin reading from my book, I just want to thank Heather and Charlie, who are ideally going to be watching this on YouTube. So they're the founders of the press, if you haven't already gathered that. So thank you so much, Heather and Charlie, for taking a chance on a then 27-year-old kid. That was 4 years ago, and I've been on the collective for 3. So thank you so much. You guys have been like parents to me, so it's appreciated. So I am going to read first from one of my poems that was published in the Wising Up Anthology that I was telling you about. It's called Double Lives, Reinventing and Those We Leave Behind. So this poem is titled Love Poem to a Tree. Love Poem to a Tree. After you and I stayed too late, at the party between parties, I said I was through with the fighting, for there are too many fights in this world. Say it to the tree, you said. The tree's shadow quivered in the window like an orgasm in the dark, and your hair was wild as an undersea flower. And I said to the tree, I want to love you. And you asked me to say it again, and so I said, I want to love you, which I thought the same as telling you, because everything is connected. But then you went back to Iowa, and I felt the empty hiss between my shoulders. How difficult to speak to a world whose beauty reflected blank loss. From the breakwaters to the sand dunes, to every face, all the while wanting everything to tell me you'd be back from the endless cornfields, but no thing replied. And the world seemed a hollow canyon without echo. I'd call in for you, only you. Until without warning, you're present again in everything, even that tree. Now I can speak. I hate this earth for burying you standing up. I demand to know why, but the glittering dunes refuse to answer. The deserted lobster pots on the docks refuse to answer. And the fishermen, whose skin like old boxing gloves I've searched, hoping to find yours underneath, refuse to answer. I keep saying, I want to love you, but words are impossible to say to the one who is never here. Even so, I keep saying, I want to love you, until I come to love this strange world, with or without you in it. So, the next one I'm going to read is titled Smashing Toilets, based on a true story, as fortunately, unfortunately, most of my work is. I wish I could be one of those writers, and it was like, oh yes, it's total fiction and mean it, and I never had much of a career for fiction, unfortunately. So I don't know if you guys, I know that some people have been to P-Town before. Do you guys remember, there's this house on Commercial Street, for those of you who don't. George Bryant used to live there, and he would just hoard. He would hoard all this junk and all this garbage, and it was literally just bursting at the seams. And he used to like to smash toilets because with a sledgehammer, because he liked the porcelain to pave his driveway. So he and I had this great routine where he would call me, and whenever I was in a really pissed off mood, I would go over there and smash toilets with him. So this is dedicated to George, and he was real cool. He's like, oh, why did you change my name in this poem? You could have used my real name. So thank you for that, George. This one is titled Smashing Toilets. I'm walking home from work, trying not to allow the hurt I've packed to spill into the street like belongings from an unlatched suitcase. Not the customer who snapped like an alligator with a bug on its nose. Not the coworker who said, so you're like me, single with no life? Or how I told her, in order to empower another person, you have to empower yourself. I feel helpless as a fish in a basket, and I'm trying to figure out where this country got off saying women can't be angry, and when I got off saying I couldn't be angry. And just as I'm trying to decipher when the perfect moment falls to tell someone how full of shit I think they are, I see Jim Briers, the man who hoards so much miscellaneous junk his house vomits onto the seashore, then the neighboring parking lot. The town is after him to clean up. Books about the physics of wind, old air conditioners, banisters. I'm smashing toilets, he says. His driveway is, as always, a mosaic of crushed pots, saucers, as if domesticity's flown into a quiet rage. He gives me a pair of goggles to protect myself and a hammer. I bring it down and feel the inertia, feel the fragments of the day's dialogue shatter in ceramic confetti. Someone must have really hurt you, my coworker said to me. And I bring the hammer down. I refuse to remember you. Men are like toilets, either occupied or full of shit. So goes the old saying. I feel the anger I thought was finished. I smash another toilet. The good folks in the grocery store parking lot pretend to look away. I let them know I am not the benign woman who fetches their coffee. I'm living to shatter and smash, to pave my patch of this gorgeous road. So I'd like to, thank you. I'd like to issue my formal apology to Angel Foods. Because that was, sorry, Liz. Let's see, what else should I read? Let's see, I do this a lot. I kind of like to jump around. I'll read Mink Rooftop, okay? Another true story. We ended up on a seaside rooftop, sipping champagne from flutes with two women who'd just gotten married. One in a peach-colored tuxedo and closely cropped hair, the other in a brown lace dress with canary pin curls, attended by two old queens in black fedoras. When the bride brought out a mink the same color as the swirls in a cherrywood floor, you pointed at me, your hair wild beneath your cowboy hat and just as dark as your eyes, wide from the pot we'd smoked. You wanted me to get into the mink naked. It seemed natural as exhaling. Maybe you thought I wouldn't do it. All I have are the pictures that prove it. Slaughters of mauve, pink, and yellow flowers garnish the rooftop. The fog is the color of a widow's gray streak. I hold a rose with dark-edged petals between my teeth and a glass of champagne. You kept photographing as I opened the coat part way like a shy curtain, and I'm laughing with my head thrown so far back my fillings show. Now you've gone, and now this harbor town is snapped up like a suitcase, and now the fishermen are stranded in bars where they misplace memory like lost coins. Now I'm stuck in this room telling myself we were more than two broken sticks rubbing together. It was a moment, said a friend. That's all. Like flowers pressed in a book. As I sit in this room with the rain coming down on all sides, a moment like that in the picture, when the question was more important than the answer, I remember the one you asked that day amid the fog and glittering salt. Is this the most beautiful moment of your life? So, let me think. I will read my semi-ekphrastic painting poem. Painting of a truck. But when you look closer, a man and woman lounge in the front of his blood rust pickup. Her body is half spilling out of the ajar door, bare feet slung through the open window, as if this accident called life is gentle. They're all wrong for each other, love premature as a robin's egg, waiting to meet gravity on a dark lawn. Maybe he works with his hands, a painter, a carpenter, his hair is shucked corn. He sinks pool balls into pockets with one fluid swoop. She has a snap to her voice she's picked up from a city and can't put down. He sands her sharp words until they're no longer blunt. Should I keep describing us after objectivity fails and sentiment takes over? Distance doesn't work, but I'm afraid that if I get too close to you, my rib cage will cave in on my heart like a miner who spent his last second breathing gold. Lord knows a man and a woman can't go anywhere without hard work and argument. Though we sat in that truck, who knows how long, not going anywhere, not working, not arguing, until the storm gave up. I've decided to leave us there, for the rain to keep freckling the windshield, for us to stop hammering logic on this world, an effort erratic as the heart, yet incessant as its beats, for each day to go on, not caring if we do. I've decided for us to love this world, for as long as we can stand to be in it. So, the third section of the book took place in Cuba. So I'll read that last poem. The Absolute Value of Loneliness. It's hard to quantify certain things. In Havana, though I know how much my government doesn't want me here, I walk deeper into the sun-stunned streets, the blue, green, and pink buildings, deeper into the sweet stink of alley garbage, past the men drinking rum hunched over dominoes, the kids swinging a stick to hit a plastic bottle cap. In America, there's no place to go when the loneliness gets too thick to walk through, except a bar, which breeds more lonely, until the bar, full of shadows catching shadows, glows with something akin to love, while the dark hides the shame of being human. But now, a woman and a man with skin like toasted almond break through my thought barrier, say, "Come with us," and their broken English cobbles together a bridge, and my feet decide to step forward and walk it with them, their laughter lighting up the street like firefly constellations, and I'm not sure where we're going, but it doesn't matter. In their house are cousins with hats turned backwards, smelling of soapy cologne, uncles with winking gold teeth and kind eyes who, rum-weary, nod off in wicker chairs, while small children scatter like mice under the roofless house. Rumba throbs through the speakers. And how can anyone feel lonely in a world like this, even I who feel alone everywhere? A woman with a bright white grin and eyes that refuse to look away teaches me to salsa, moving my hips in figure eights. I remember the idea of an absolute value, how a negative attaches itself to a number, the way many times in this life loneliness has to me. Joliet was too landlocked, too small to fit my mother's shadow. I lost too many friends to fishtailing in the cornfields, to suburbs, to the Republican Party. New York was too filled with light, and the star of my desire always a hair's breadth away. Cape Cod was too small, and the whales couldn't save me. But today I'm moving in the sign of infinity, passing a bottle of rum with these people I will never see again, and for once I don't feel alone. For once, it's okay to be lost amid people who don't dare speak a word about their dictator, people who face famine when a hurricane blows over their delicate chickens, people who are still dancing past a history of slaves bent like black scythes over the cane fields, who are dancing into the present second, who still will be dancing long after I leave. And when I go home to a street that won't allow me to dance, they'll still be with me, my hand and foot extended, not knowing how to take the next step, but infinitely moved. Thank you. So next, Sharon, Milton, and I will be holding a Q&A, so please feel free to stick around and ask us whatever questions you may have.